Welcome back to the Carp Chronicles podcast. In this episode, we go deep, a sciencey kind of deep, or at least Patrick does. Obviously, with that in mind, this is an episode for bait nerds, bait geeks, whatever you'd like to call them. I mean that most respectful way possible, of course. But it's for people that are passionate about bait and they find the science side very, very interesting. Now, I do my best to kind of figure out what it means for the everyday angler, the person that just wants to, catch more fish and they don't necessarily want to learn about amino acids and carp reception and all that good stuff. So I do my best, but in all honesty, probably one of those ones for the people that are a little bit more interested in the science side of things. Now, for those of you lucky enough to be in the bait club, Patrick is very kindly coming on to answer any questions you might have, and he's going to give away some juicy bits and basically tell us how we can utilize his knowledge to catch more fish. So for those of you in the bait club, we've got that coming up, as you all know. For those of you not in the bait club, if that is of interest to you, if you want more access to Patrick, you want to ask him some questions, and you want to basically get educated by him, then by all means you're welcome to join us. And if you can't attend the Zoom meeting with Patrick within the bait club, you can just catch up on the replay. I will record it. If you have any questions you want asked, let me know. I will make sure I ask Patrick as well, and we'll get that covered. Or if you just join the bait club after the meeting with Patrick, you'll still be able to watch that replay back and get all of the juicy info. You can head on over to optibaits.com/BC, or just go to the OptiBaits website, click on all products, you'll see it there. In fact, I think it's even on the front screen there. So yeah, anyway, won't waffle on too much. That's the bait club. If you want to join us, by all means, go ahead and join us. Also, I'd love to mention our superb sponsor, targetbaits.co.uk. If you haven't checked these guys out, I urge you to do so. Super fresh ingredients, as I say all the time. I'm a big fan of these guys. They have some tremendous products out there. I urge you to go have a look, sift through the website, see if anything takes your fancy, and if it does, you can save 10% at checkout by entering the code CC10. That's CC10 at targetbaits.co.uk. That is it for the intro. I hope you enjoy this episode with Dr. Patrick Mills. Patrick, welcome back.
Thank you, Sam. It's great to be back.
It's been a while, isn't it? I think.
Yeah.
Was it 2021? I think.
It's at least 3 years. Yeah, I think we were chatting during lockdown. That's why I was kind of talking to you from my house last time. Today I'm actually at work, but not at work, if that makes sense. I'm sitting in my office at my college with the door closed, but it's okay. We're on I don't have any teaching today, so we're good.
Good stuff. So, I mean, obviously this podcast is going to be quite science intensive, isn't it? Quite science heavy. I'm going to do my best to make this something for everyone. So, obviously we'll go into the depths of science, or you will, I won't. But we'll also do our best to kind of bring it back just so the average angler out on the bank can take something away from this. I think that'll be really, really good. So obviously in our last episode, we spoke about amino acids. That is your wheelhouse. It's a hugely interesting and very vast area of fish attraction. What have you been doing since we last spoke?
Well, it's kind of interesting, Sam, because the last time we spoke, I left you with a teaser, and that was the new research I was embarking on at that time, which was the use of this novel blocking molecule. And it turns out if you use a blocking molecule and pretty much any amino you like in this kind of dual mixture, you can actually lock in the correct level of stimulation over a very broad range of dosage. And if you remember from before, we had a kind of a lengthy conversation about how narrow the window of dosage was for single aminos, and how my research at the time had mixed two aminos to make that window broader, and we'd actually talked about the first product a little bit. And since then, we've come on leaps and bounds. We've gone from literally version 1 to version 2 of Impulse now. So it's a completely new blend. and it's extremely useful for particularly big carp anglers where you may have a limited time with your narrow concentration window. Now, as long as you put in enough and you keep it topped up, it's there's no problem with time. You can wait a long time for your fish to turn up. I would like to say real quick that I can't remember which scientist said it. It might have been Einstein, but probably not. People always quote Einstein incorrectly. But a picture speaks 1,000 words, right? So what I did was I've written a recent article called Carp Fever Revisited for those anglers who have read Carp Fever and got a lot from it. I literally picked up where Kevin Maddox left off, and I've basically filled in all the gaps now. So we think, as of today, I think we got a pretty clear picture of actually how amino acid stimulation works in carp. And I, put together a 31-page document explaining everything. And I tried my best to do it from kind of an angler's perspective. So I would encourage listeners to perhaps, if you have it linked to your site or they want to check out my website and kind of like have it there. And as we talk, perhaps I could say, oh, the picture on page 4 or something, because looking at that picture will really kind of cement what I'm talking about, because it's hard to imagine in your brain sometimes what's going on. And a picture does speak 1,000 words sometimes.
Yeah, you did mention this to me. I will link it on my site. That's not a problem at all. So for the listener, if you go to my website, so optibaits.com/Patrick, you will be able to see exactly what Patrick is talking about.
Yeah, it's also available on my website if they're interested. I can.
Yeah, what's your website address?
Okay, so I actually have 2 now, believe it or not. So, the one where I have an interesting setup where I have my own website, which is called aminotech.com, AMINOTEC.com, Aminotech, and that's really the research and development site where I discuss in detail for every bait head in the world exactly how this amino acid stuff works. And I've got probably 6 to 8 like papers there, if you wish, starting from many years ago through literally last week where I uploaded my last one. And if you look for Carp Fever Revisited, that's the article we're actually talking about today, because it's like specifically for carp anglers.
Okay, I didn't even know that. I'll do some digging when I got some free time.
The other site's the one you're familiar with. It's biosourcebaits.com, which is our kind of like Shopify site.
Yeah. So just to backtrack slightly, you were saying about the activity window of the amino acids. So basically, in layman's terms, this amino acid blend, super attractive to carp, but you have to have the right window, the right moment in time where the amino acids are in the right concentration within the water, which is obviously a big issue because you don't know when that fish is going to swim next to your bait to detect it. But you have worked around this by adding something to it, which you call a blocker, right? What is this blocker which would extend the activity time of your amino acids?
Well, that's all I can say without impinging on IP. The blocker is a proprietary species, right? Okay. So this is what gives us a competitive advantage. No one's ever used this kind of technology before, and this is the basis of the invention. So all I can tell you is that it kind of maintains the correct ratio of amino acids on the receptor sites. Now, it's kind of interesting. Last time I gave you a best guess, and I said I think 30% of the carp's amino acid receptors are occupied to give you a correct level of stimulation. I'm revising that to now say it's between 50 and 85% based on some studies. Okay. So if you think of the carp having however many receptors, you think they have 100,000 receptors. If between 50% and 85% of those are occupied by a single amino acid, then you'll get an optimal response. And it's like drinking coffee. So 1 cup of coffee maybe doesn't do it for you. That's kind of like 10% of your receptors occupied, your caffeine receptor. But if you have 50 cups of coffee, that's like 99% of your receptors occupied, and you're kind of like too kind of over the top, right? It's like the Goldilocks zone for the porridge, so not too hot, not too cold, just right. And just right is between 50 and 85. And that's based on literature from medicine, where it's the same kind of idea with drugs in terms of receptor sites, and the therapeutic effect is between 50 and 85. So it's not something I've discovered; it's something I looked up. So,
But this has been proven in carp, has it?
no, because it's not been proven directly in carp,
Right.
but it's kind of a standard model of receptor site agonist, they call it. Amino acid is an agonist in the body; it would be a drug. So how amino acids stick to receptors is just like how caffeine would stick to its receptor, an opioid would stick to its receptor, and therapeutic effects happen between 50 and 85% coverage.
And is so with that 50 to 85%, is that just a mixture of any old amino acids, a certain type of amino
Yeah,
acids,
so
or
okay, so let's
one?
back up a sec. If you remember, I'll give you the first reference from the paper. So if you look at, even if you have a copy of Carp Fever hanging around, Kevin Maddox did this work early on, right? And on page 3, I've basically reproduced Kevin's table of amino acids, and he has excellent reaction, which is a best fit of the amino acid to the site,
That's
and then yeah,
lysine and valine, right?
that's correct. Those are the two best,
Yeah.
right? And then we got good fit, and then we got poor fit, and then we got no reaction.
Mhm.
So each of those amino acids will occupy the site. If it's a good fit, it will have actually what's called a longer residence time. So it kind of binds and it has time to kind of work its magic for longer, if that makes sense. So a
Mm.
longer residence time is essentially a good fit. And that's what you want. So that's why valine and lysine are more potent, because they are essentially more sticky. That's a good way to think about it.
Yeah. Okay. And this blocker, as you call
Okay.
it, this
Yeah.
this isn't a kind of combination of amino acids. This is
No.
something that isn't an amino acid that you've paired with them.
Well, I'll give you like a little tip, right? So, um, when you look at the structure of amino acids, they have I don't want to get into too much detail. They have like a central atom, right? And
Mhm.
from that central atom, you have 4 kind of groups come off it, right? Okay. So you have the amino group, the acid group, that's why they're called amino acids, just a simple hydrogen, which is just doing nothing. And then what's most important is the side chain. So think of the side chain like the shaft of a key, right? And it's that side chain that's different between the 20 amino acids. And it's that side chain that goes into the lock. Okay. Now, think of then the amino acid a bit like a 3-legged stool. So you have the side chain, the amino group, and the acid group sitting down on the receptor like the legs of a stool, right? What
Mhm.
I've done with the blocker is essentially remove the side chain, right? So it's a stool with 2 legs, if that makes sense.
Makes perfect sense.
Yeah. And that doesn't engage the lock, which is what you want, because then it just blocks off the site without activating it. And here's the big trick, right? So here's an analogy I like to use with my students, right? When we talk about this in our research class. So I say, hey, I've got a chessboard and it's got 64 squares on it, right? And, just like a regular chessboard, right? And I want to cover 50% of those squares because we'll assume that each square on the chessboard is a receptor. So I've got 64 receptors and I want to cover half of them with amino acids to make a 50% coverage, get a therapeutic effect, get a stimulation. But this is how it works in nature. So amino acids in the milligram range are literally thousands of times more than you would need to cover those sites. Here's the analogy. So you have a truck with a million, black drafts, right? Checkers, like we say here, and a million white ones, right? The black one is an amino acid, the white one is the blocker, right? Assuming all those drafts are mixed up on the truck, and you back up to the chessboard, which only has 64 spaces, and you pour the checkers or the drafts onto the board. On average, how many of those squares will have a black one? How many will have a white one? Half and half, right?
Of course, yeah.
It doesn't matter anymore the concentration. That's why the window is now limitless. It now depends entirely on ratio. So
Right.
as long as we have the correct ratio of blocker to amino acid, we can lock in through ratio the correct stimulatory response. And that is, I think, probably, he said modestly, right? That's probably the biggest discovery, I think, in amino acid science so far, is that you can actually lock in this effect over a very broad concentration range, which is leaps and bounds beyond what we were doing before. And it's actually pretty crazy, right? So you can actually, it's not just doubling or tripling, it's 10, 100, 1,000 times more concentrated. It still works just the same.
You don't see, that is incredible, really.
Yeah,
It's
this is way where I don't want to go off on too much of a sales pitch, but this is why we're really launching now, because we've cracked it.
Yeah.
And we feel confident, and we'll actually even guarantee an increase in catch rates if anglers use the product correctly. And we're really putting our money where our mouth is on that one. So,
yeah, I'm gonna grill you on that later.
Yeah, you can go for it.
Talk about your products.
Yeah.
I've got some in front of me, and we will get to it.
Yeah.
So just quickly, so obviously you've extended this window indefinitely.
Yeah, I got a picture for that, right?
Sorry, what was that?
I'm looking at our paper here, and if you look, I can't even find it. Oh yeah, page 27, right?
Of what? It's sorry,
of the Carp Fever Revisited article, page 27.
Oh crikey, I haven't got it.
Okay, it's fine.
I'm a professional over here. I can try and find it.
No, it's okay. So the bottom line is I've got a heat map. We call it a heat map. It's
right
on the one axis on the left, it's the ratio of amino acid to blocker. And along the bottom, it's the actual coverage or concentration. And it shows you the perfect ratio, and it shows you the kind of permanent optimal stimulation.
So my question was going to be, so your old method, which was just a combination of amino acids, that was obviously highly attractive if you hit that sweet spot. I think you called it the Goldilocks method. Is the new version with the aid of the blocker just as attractive as that one is at its peak, or is there a little bit of a trade-off to have that long extended window?
No trade-off. What happens is we've identified where the optimal stimulation occurs, and then we've locked it in. Right. So what happens with the original one is you kind of slowly kind of like tilt through. You're too low, you're just right, you're too high, and that kind of happens over an extended range of concentrations. But now with the ratio, we just lock in where we want to be. And as far as we know, we've not found an upper limit to it. And there is a threshold. You have to establish what's called receptor site saturation. So back to our chessboard, you have to cover all 64 squares. But always, if you're beyond like 5 milligrams, which is tiny amount of amino acid, if you're beyond that, that's the threshold. It's the fixed ratio. So, if there is a slight downfall to the product, if it's a super, super, super low concentration. But to be honest, I mean, quarter of a teaspoon is like way enough to get it to work. So, yeah, our actual dosage is for a kilo of pellets, we're talking, or a kilo of boilie, just with a glug or something. You're talking 30 milliliters. Right, so that's just a solution sprinkled on it.
I mean, which is obviously it's soluble, it's going to get carried away in the current, etc., etc.
Yeah,
that there's no working around that side of things, is there?
No, it's an interesting question because what happens is yes, you're correct. So if I surface coat my pellets, it will slowly wash off. So we tend not to use the liquid, which is kind of real thin, just a liquid, right? But we tend to use, instead of the liquid, we'll use a gel. So we use like I call it a goo or a goop. It's like a really kind of viscous kind of material, and it washes off much more slowly. And it can also, I think we talked about this a little bit last time, it can also kind of seep into the gravel or into the substrate, and it will remain active for quite a period of time. And because you can be super heavy-handed now, so if you really, really coat or glug your boilies, a lot of that glug will seep into the bottom, and it will make an area of attraction. And even if your bait gets eaten, they'll still be coming back to kind of search the area. And we've seen that anecdotally from testers back in the day.
Interesting. So, I mean, we're going to talk about amino acids a lot today, obviously, but since we last spoke, have you been testing anything aside from amino acids?
No, because I'm I very much stay in my lane, as they like to
Yeah.
say here in the States. So, I mean, I'd spend all my time thinking about amino acids and how I can tweak the recipes and things like that. And to be honest, just recently, I've actually been going beyond tank tests. We talked about the heat map, which is in the paper there.
Mm.
So the heat map, which shows you the relationship between ratio of amino acids and concentration and stimulation level, that work was actually done using a statistical model. So I've partnered with a couple of mathematicians from my college, and it's kind of brilliant because we of course, got the experimental results 10 years ago, and we know the exact ratio that worked. And then they independently do a statistical model of the fish's chemoreceptors, and they come up with exactly the same answer. So when you have an independent confirmation like that, it really shows you that you're on the right track. So we're doing a lot of models now. Oh, that sounds weird. I do a lot of models. And
Lucky
that's
man.
an old science joke. It's just terrible. Anyway, so models are a thing and they confirm what we've shown with experiment. But then they're great because they may show you a better answer which you haven't tried yet. So there might be a spot on the map where you think, oh, well, I'd like to try that and see what happens. So really good. And another thing I've been working on is expanding the work to be species specific. All right. So Impulse, which is out right now, is a universal fish attractor, right? So every fish we found that is sensitive to amino acids has the same receptor that carp has, which is the basic slash neutral receptor. Okay. That's prevalent in all species, catfish, sturgeon, trout, even, right? And so Impulse works great for everything. However, and I don't want to get into too much detail, there are other receptors in other fish, right? So if you want to get away from carp, other species have different receptors, and you can actually stimulate that receptor, if you like, with a different amino acid and blocker. And that's our next product in the pipeline, which is catatonic, which is based, for US anglers mostly. It's designed to attract catfish specifically, because believe it or not, there are anglers in the United States who do not like to catch carp. They like to catch catfish, and they don't like to catch carp so much. So that works for them. And then the holy grail, if you like, is our final product, which I'm actually working on right now with the US government and United States Geological Survey. I'm just talking with them now about a product called Cyprophil, which, if you like your Latin, is called carp lover, right? Cyprophil. And it's a carp only attractant. And so they're interested in attracting the Asian carp, especially to their nets, not catfish, right? So that will go in their nets and they'll, preferentially catch these invasive Asian carp. And because the Asian carp and the common carp have similar receptor set, I'm hoping to that'll carry over directly to the angling market. But that's kind of in the early test stages. I'm actually, believe it or not, testing it for the first time in the lab this coming Friday. So I suspect by the time this goes to air, we'll have tested it. But yeah, so that's in the pipeline. And to make a very lengthy sentence even longer, the final one is what we're calling hydrostim, because we know that anglers love to use hydros or hydrolysates as fish attractants slash bait ingredients, things like that. But they're of limited effectiveness in terms of stimulatory effect. We can talk about details later. But what you can do, you can add just enough blocker to any hydro in theory to make it highly stimulatory. So that's kind of a holy grail. And I've been talking with a hydro manufacturer, right? And as long as I know the ratios of amino acids in your hydro, I can probably, fingers crossed, make that hydro super stimulatory towards carp. So you can use I know anglers love to use hydros as glugs and things. So, right now hydros are off the table because they interfere with the current product. But then because we now understand how the receptor system works, we can actually use that to our advantage. And we're hopefully going to get this hydrostim out by the end of the year.
Yeah. So when you say hydrolysates are off the table, you mean to be used in conjunction with your product?
Yes, it's one of the key things, because the trick is to maintain well, just to backtrack, Impulse is a blend of blocker and an attractive amino acid. Now I think you know which one, right? So It doesn't matter which one you use, to be honest, right? But it's the blocker that's important, right? So it's an amino acid and the blocker in a fixed ratio, right? Remember, we wanted that ratio on the receptors. So 50-50 ratio if you want 50% coverage. Yeah. Now, if you add that impulse to a hydrolysate, which has loads and loads and loads of free amino acids, suddenly it's a 90-10 mixture and it's not going to work. So it's all about maintaining that ratio, right? If the ratio is skewed through the addition of external amino acids, it isn't going to work. Right.
Yeah, because there's free unbound amino acids in the hydrolysate.
Yeah, there is, exactly. So and they're actually at quite a high concentration as well, right? So I don't want to get too techie, but out there in the wild, there's a natural background concentration of amino acids in literally any water system.
Yeah.
So it's very tiny, but it's there. And so what fish actually detect is an increase in background, and they basically follow the concentration gradient, right? And that leads them to their food.
Mm. You said I think you said one amino acid, and then you said it doesn't matter which one you use.
No.
Did I hear you right?
Well, yes and no. Okay, so with more detail. So cyprinoids, their receptor is what we call a bivalent receptor. What does that mean? It means it has a spot where a basic amino acid can sit, and it has a separate spot where a neutral amino acid can sit.
Yeah.
And if the basic is on there, it works. It turns on. If the neutral is on there, it turns on. But if both are on there, it turns off. And this is a direct descendant, if you wish, of Kevin Maddox's early observation, where he was talking in his book, and I got it sitting right next to me here. He was amazed, right? So he said, hey, acids which work best by themselves, and he was talking about lysine and valine, right, do not work in combination. So when you mix lysine, which is basic, with valine, which is neutral, you get cancellation, right? So that's why you can use either basic or neutral, but not both.
And that's because
also why hydrolysates don't work, because hydrolysates and hydros have approximately equal numbers of basic and neutral.
They're basically fulfilling the same role and the same receptor key, right?
Yeah, so
receptor lock, I should say.
Yeah, so just to back up a little bit, when you look at an amino acid profile, there are 20 natural amino acids. So proteins undergo digestion to make 3 amino acids, right? So it's like, you disassemble the protein into its building blocks. Of those 20 amino acids, 3 are basic, 2 are acidic. There's a bunch of neutral ones, and there's a few what we call polar ones. So there are 4 side chain families. And it turns out that carp are really only sensitive to basic and neutral. And guess what? Kevin saw that, right? So he said lysine and valine, basic and neutral, are the best on their own. Right.
Yeah. Okay. So I'm trying to swing this back into sort of what it would mean for the average angler out on the bank.
Yeah, let's talk. Yeah.
Obviously, I understand, yes, go and buy your products. I do get that. But we're talking about hydrolysates, which are used in, I wouldn't say most baits, but a lot of baits, a lot of, quote unquote, potentially or potentially not good baits contain hydrolysates, and they work very, very well in real world angling experience. So is that in spite of the fact that there's multiple free amino acids, or is there something else at play? Because obviously you're very granular with your work. You have to be.
Yeah.
But
I understand exactly where you come from. So nature is actually extremely clever, and it's kind of interesting as a scientist, because when you kind of find these things out for yourself and you think, oh my God, that was so simple. Nature is its beauty is its simplicity.
Yeah.
Right. So if you look into this in some detail, and if you look at literally any amino acid profile, what you'll find when you look at the ratio in literally any amino acid profile of neutral to basic is about 6-4. Okay. So there's about a third more neutrals than basics in any hydrolyzed protein, which is interesting. So if you think about what we just said about the 2 spots on the receptor at very low concentration, right, you're going to get a lot of empty sites, a few neutral sites full because the 60-40 ratio, 6-4 ratio, and a very, very, very tiny amount of basic sites. Now, because you have a slight excess of neutral sites, there'll be a good signal, right? It's not going to be a massive signal because it's only a slight difference in the amounts of neutral and basic, but it's there. And that's why hydrolysates at low concentration are mildly stimulatory. Okay, that's why fish are attracted to them. However, and this is where it's kind of a warning sign for anglers, if you overdo it, right? So now you've thrown in a bunch of hydrolysate. It doesn't matter that it's a 6-4 ratio. You've put in the world supply of both types of amino acid. All the sites will be doubly occupied, meaning they cancel. So you see that Kevin Maddox thing.
Yeah.
Yeah. So hydrolysates at high concentration are tasty for sure because it's a taste thing as well, but in terms of amino acid stimulation, it turns off at high concentration for them.
And is that more when you blend different or I should say, would that be heightened when you blend different types of hydrolysates?
It's actually quite interesting. You look at any profile and there's different this is fantastic result actually from nature. We talked about nature being brilliant, right? So you can look at literally any profile and all the numbers are different, aren't they? There's X% of this one, X% of that one. But when you look at the classes of amino acids, when you look at the basic ones together and the neutral ones together, it's pretty much always 60-40. And that's what nature's receptors have evolved to detect, right? They've evolved to detect that slight difference between classes. And that's why these doesn't matter the hydrolysate, it doesn't matter which one, even though they have slightly different amounts of individuals, the classes are in a fixed ratio. So the receptor works the same each time for any protein. And it's actually, just as a quick side effect of that, this is why carp and catfish are different, because catfish have another receptor which allows them to detect the slightest amount of amino acid in the water because they detect all 4 classes, whereas carp only detect 2. Which is better for carp because carp are omnivore grazers, right? The amount of amino acids coming out of a bloodworm bed is massive compared to a single dead fish, right? So for catfish, they're wired to detect small amounts of amino acids from all 4 groups as fast as they can, swim over there and grab the dead fish. Carp, they can't get overloaded, so they only have the one type of receptor, which then allows them to graze. All right. So people think, oh, different amino acids for different fish. Well, not really. It's more about forage. It's more about forage. So if it's a small single food item, 2 receptors. If it's a big bed of food, it's a 1 receptor. So that's why carp have evolved to be grazers, I think, and catfish more predatory scavengers. So the receptor types within a fish are really governed by food. That's what I'm trying to say.
So really, if we wanted to enhance our bait somehow, rather than using these weird and wonderful hydrolysates and different things like that, are we actually better trying to utilize one singular amino acid that's attractive, say lysine, valine?
If you get this is the problem, because this is our original product way back 16 years ago. Our original product, hence the name of the company, right? So Biosource Baits original product was Biosource, right? And Biosource was a single amino acid product. And the reason it worked was because we use very, very strict dosing protocols. And when someone when someone bought the bait, they literally were told, you add exactly this much and you feed exactly this often. And it's brilliant for pole fishing, right? Because the match angler would literally, as routine in match fishing, feed a little pot every 15 minutes or so. And we figured the rule of 15. So it was like, a 50 milliliter pot every 15 minutes. And that seemed perfect for a single amino acid. But that's very strict, right? And then the second generation, and it was strict because the concentration window is extremely narrow. And that procedure kept it in that window. But that doesn't work for big carp, right? Because you're not feeding every 15 minutes, right? So that's why we went into the route of first was the aminoplex, which is called Jigsaw when we first developed it, which was used with Richworth's S-Core. That first broadened the window a little bit, and now we've kind of got the window really broad. So for anglers wishing to do their own, and I do have some hints and tips if they want to do it themselves in the carp Fever Revisited article, I literally tell them what the jigsaw is made from. And they can read between the lines at least and make their own, right? And I'm comfortable doing that because the blocker product is far superior. So we're pursuing the blocker now, which is the holy grail.
Yeah.
And the old stuff, single amino, yeah, throw it in there at 0.5% by weight. You're catching fish, but not as many as if you use the other products.
Yeah, interesting.
Yeah.
Interesting. I mean, we we're talking about the attraction of amino acids a lot. You
Yeah.
touched upon the gustatory effect, the palatability.
Mm.
The palatability side of amino acids, does that differ from the attraction side? Are
Oh,
some
absolutely. Yeah.
very
It's two,
stimulatory?
yeah.
Are they
It's
very
two different
stimulatory on
mechanisms.
one side and then not the other? How does that
Yeah.
balance up?
Yeah. So fundamentally, the 20 amino acids are all to some degree similar. And if you look at Kevin's league table, super good, good, poor, and none isn't really none. They're just not concentrated enough, right? So they're all similar to some degree. And it's to do with the goodness of fit. Now, what was your question? Sorry, I was distracted. Oh yeah, so gustatory versus olfactory. So what you're talking about there with Kevin's table is olfactory stimulation, right? So it enters through the nares, through the nose of the fish. It gets washed through the olfactory bulb, they call it, and in the olfactory bulb, there's like this what's called the epithelium, right? The olfactory epithelium, which is like a skin, right? Super high surface area. So you've seen those pictures of your stomach, right? It's got like all those ridges and stuff, so it absorbs food. That's the same as the nose, right? So the olfactory bulb has this olfactory skin, and on that skin, that super high surface area, sit the receptors. Okay, and they're turned on or off. It's a very simple thing: on or off. Food here, food not here. So there's no subtlety to it with amino acids just in the nose, so to speak. However, this is why we call amino acids the primary switch, right? Or the primeval switch, I should say. That's what we call it, because it's evolutionary speaking. I don't want to get into details of evolution and genetics and things, but it's a very simple evolutionary thing to make essentially just two proteins, and they'll say yes or no for food. That's what the receptors are. But then when you look at millions of years of evolution, now we can tell the difference between stale bread and fresh bread, right? Amino acids can't do that. Those very complex molecules associated with those foods now interact with newer, evolutionary speaking, dedicated receptors. We may have 100,000 different types of receptors for different kinds of food, right? And we can tell rancid from fresh, strawberry from lemon, things like that. That's not amino acids. Amino acids is yes or no. So amino acids generally, we don't associate them with taste. However, just by luck of the draw, some amino acids have a shape which matches the shape of some of those food molecules. So, for example, we know MSG, right? That is a flavoring, and that is an amino acid. It's a salt of glutamate. It's an
glutamic acid, yeah.
Yeah, right. So MSG does double duty. It has taste and amino acid stimulatory properties. And glycine also. Glycine has sweet properties, right? It tastes sweet. And it's often used as a filler in like those saccharin packets and things like that. So yes, glycine and MSG will stimulate amino acid receptors, but they'll also stimulate olfactory modern taste receptors as well, right? Or smell receptors, I should say. Yeah. So yeah, there's a little bit of double duty for a few of them. Yeah.
Do you look at the gustatory side of fish?
Not at all, no, because the amino acid receptor is in the nose, so to speak, and gustatory is in the mouth. So the barbels of a fish are basically gustatory, right? So like their tongue is their barbels, kind of thing. So
and it's not something that it's not your area of expertise.
No, but I think there are analogies to humans. So you got like salt, sweet, sour, and bitter, right? And that's what you get through your tongue, and that's what I think the fish similarly get through their barbels. But they're always like, and when we taste food, we're not actually tasting smoky bacon flavor on our tongue. We're actually having those molecules evaporate through our nose, right? This is why when people sample wine, they're always breathing through their nose, right? When they're sampling wine and swishing it around their mouth, they swish it in their mouth to evaporate the volatile smell molecules, right? So when we taste something, we're actually smelling it. right? The only true taste receptors in our mouth are those four, right? Salt, sour, bitter, sweet, right?
Yeah, and have you seen these air up bottles where essentially you're just drinking water, but there's a little
Right.
ring of smelly stuff, and essentially as you drink the water, you're smelling a fruit
Oh yeah,
out.
yeah. That makes
Yeah,
I can understand because that's an old nightclub trick, right? My brother, who is in nightclub security, tells me these things, right? So what they do when they got a drunk customer in a nightclub is they fill up the glass with actually the first thing they do is they dip the rim of the glass in gin or something, then just fill it up with tonic, right? And that's and the customer thinks they've got a gin and tonic, but they're just tasting the gin off the rim of the glass.
because you're smelling it. Yeah,
Yeah,
it's like you're
yeah,
tasting it. Yeah, it's very
yeah,
interesting.
yeah.
Yeah. Okay. Well, I mean, that's knocked out probably 80% of my questions today. If you don't look at the taste side of things, but that's fine. That's okay. Um,
That's all right. I mean, taste is if you remember, taste is really smell, right? Then I'm probably getting your 80% back, right? So
yeah, yeah, no,
yeah, because when you walk into a tackle shop and you pull the lid off one of those flavors, you smell it, don't you? And you go,
you do.
that smells like crab, and it also tastes like crab. It's the same molecule. It's just that when it's in your mouth, it evaporates into your nose.
Yeah, and I mean, flavors, carp flavors. Everyone smells flavors, but they don't taste flavors.
Right, exactly. You wouldn't like,
Weird thing, isn't it?
yeah, yeah. It's like when you have a blocked nose, you have a cold or something, you can
Yeah,
barely taste anything, can you?
no.
Because that kind of confirms that your nose is helping you taste things,
Mm.
right? Or what appears to be taste, right?
Yeah. So just to backtrack slightly, you obviously with your products, you recommend people don't use them alongside any food stuff that would have free
Ah,
form amino acids,
okay,
right?
so yeah, this is an interesting one. It's a question I get a lot, and I'm glad you asked it. And it goes back to Kevin Maddox's work, actually. I always keep going back to Kevin. He's like the godfather, right? And Kevin, if you're listening, please contact me. I'd like to have a chat with you.
Hmm.
So, they say never meet your heroes, but I'd like to meet him. Anyway, so Kevin, back in the day, he found out conclusively when he did his experiments, and he basically pumped amino acid solutions into a fish tank, right? And permeated the gravel, right? And the fish would come over and they'd attack the gravel, right? When he had a good one. And so he was able to create this league table, of like fish activity just based on observation. And we essentially do the same experiment today in my lab. It's a very great experimental procedure. Works great, right? And so the problem, well, let's just back up a second here. So now remind me again, what do we want to know?
Well, I hadn't actually asked you a question.
Oh,
I was getting to it, but so I don't know what you're answering. But I was just saying,
oh
you
no, I
recommend
remember. I sorry. I see, Sam. You got to remember, I'm 55 years old and I'm starting to lose it here. Right?
that's fine. That's
No, I was
fine.
going to tell you about Kevin's result.
Yeah.
So yeah, I just had a bit of a senior moment. Anyway, so
Right.
Kevin showed that dissolved amino, and you feel free to cut that out. Right? We talked earlier. It's a joke.
No, it's
Right?
fine.
You don't have to. It's a joke. All right. So Kevin showed that when amino acids are dissolved in the water, right, and the fish encounter them through breathing them in through their nose, essentially through the nares, right, and it washes over those receptors. That's what turns them on, right? So the amino acids have got to be dissolved in the water, right? And Kevin showed that really well. And then this was his, I don't want to give him a hard time because it's like 1980s, right? Who knew what, right? But what he did was he then put the amino acids in a base mix, right? And then made a boiled bait. And what did he do? He locked them inside the boiled bait so they never came out. You have to have them coming out, right? So back to your question, if an angler has a boilie with a hydro as an ingredient inside the buoy to increase the nutritional profile, as long as it's got a hard skin on it, it doesn't matter because there's not any getting out at an appreciable rate. However, if the angler uses a hydro as a glug, that's right into the water. It's going to interfere with the impulse. So, to put a caveat on it, yeah, anglers can use hydros inside their boilies if they're kind of a tight skin boilie, and then just use like a glug of our product on top. That'll work fine. What we did with Richworth actually was, back in it's like 2013 when we talked with Richworth. Pete Wilson, who's who I worked with at the time there, we purposely had a conversation where I had to explain to him that the amino acids have to leak out of the boilie at a certain rate. And if they don't, it won't work because you have to get that threshold, right? And to get around that, we made a very kind of porous bird food based boilie. So that's the trick. If anglers want to put impulse into their base mix, make sure the boilies are somewhat porous. And I recommend not using actual eggs to make your base mix, but use powdered egg and then just wet the base mix with the impulse liquid. All right. So use the impulse liquid as a wetting agent with powdered egg. Make your boilie in the normal way. If you've got like large granular pieces in there, like chunks of seed or even like chunks of biscuit or something, to give it kind of a porous, kind of spongy kind of feel, it'll work great. And also, what I'm really interested in doing, and I've not done this yet, I'm looking for people to help, is not porous, soluble boilies, right? So if you don't have egg in your mix and it's one of those that falls apart after half an hour, that's like a mini depth charge. And that's what I want. I want this depth charge kind of approach where you have your hook bait, but maybe, back in the day, a stringer, right? A stringer with 3 or 4 solubles sitting on it. Or you can even use a paste wrap, right? So you're kind of putting a package together, right? So you get that concentration around your bait super high by using a soluble boilie or paste, something like that. And then your boilie's just sitting there in the zone. That's the plan. So that's what, what we talked last time, Sam. You talked about your winter water. I'm recommending a paste wrap and soluble boilies on a stringer. That's what I'm recommending.
Yeah, I mean, all the baits that I use now are very, very soluble.
Oh, brilliant.
Oh yeah, of course, have been for years. You say not to use real eggs, but to use powdered egg. Why is
Yeah,
that?
because you want your wetting agent to be the impulse liquid. So you get, and we've always had this
Oh,
problem.
sorry.
Yeah, you
Right.
want to get enough in there. I'm not going to mention the manufacturer, but once in a while I get an inquiry from a manufacturer. And this is kind of a common question. They just want to kind of put something in the base mix and then put a boilie on the shelf, right? So I have to have the conversation about porosity, right? So you got to make it porous, and that means I've got to make a bird food bait. It won't be very hard. It won't last as long, and then the list of like reasons against it get longer and longer. But unfortunately, it's a catch-22. If you want to put the impulse in the boilie has to be porous or soluble.
Yeah.
Or you use a glug, right? And that's the other option. Or, and my favorite way of fishing is to use like a small PVA bag of pellets. And I literally get my concentrated solution of impulse spray and I spray my pellets and then I let them dry. And then you can spray them again and let them dry again if you want. And you get like a surface coating buildup. And you can store them because, once it dries, it's perfectly shelf stable. And you can then just like have that kind of like, as soon as they get wet, the aminos come off and they just attract from there.
Right. So yeah, sorry, I thought you were talking about general boilie mixes that people would make at home. You're saying don't use egg if you're utilizing your impulse product.
Yes, because you want to keep the wet side to the impulse, right?
Yeah,
So use the egg. Yeah, the egg is used as a binder, of course, right?
yeah,
But it's also the liquid part as well.
yeah.
I
Okay.
want to make the liquid part just impulse,
Yeah,
right? So I get as much impulse liquid into the boilie as humanly possible, right? And to do that, I would use powdered egg instead of like liquid eggs. If that makes
mm,
sense.
yeah, yeah.
Mm.
No, I get it. And just touching on your products, so I've got some of them in front of me. You very kindly sent some to me, or your business partner, is it Mark?
Yeah, it's kind of interesting because the last time we talked, I was, I'm a scientist, right? And I have
Mm.
literally no business experience. I just kicked myself in the, shot myself in the foot there. But I was really, really happy to meet Mark, and he's basically now got a small manufacturing facility. He helped us put the website together. So we have a state-of-the-art website. We have a UK-based manufacturing and supply. And so now people can there was a problem before, right? I'd have to mail them stuff from the United States, and the product would cost more than the postage. Right now, we're doing like everyone else. Some orders are depends what you get, but some of them postage free. So you can get them now in the UK and Europe, anywhere in the world, to be honest. And that's all down to my business partner Mark, who's done a fantastic job. And just real quick, if anybody would like to have a conversation in person with either Mark or myself, we will be at the Big One show in first weekend of March. So that'll be kind of fun. We're actually kind of like going out there, and it's just a meet and greet. We're not doing a hard sale thing. We're actually giving away products, giving anglers cups of coffee and conversations about amino acids. So any kind of like true kind of amino acid aficionados most welcome to stop by and have a chin wag and maybe pick my brain about this stuff.
Yeah, sounds good to me. So yeah, Mark sent me these products. I got them in front of me.
Yeah.
Now I can't actually remember what I was going to say. Now I was going somewhere with that, but they they're not so the liquid, for example. This
Yeah.
is flavored with a fruit flavor,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
So this is
So yeah.
it's clearly not just the amino
Yeah.
acid and the blocker
Well,
and
okay.
guessing
So let
salts.
me explain. So the original is still available. It's one of our quote unquote flavors, but it's unflavored. So the original is just the blocker and the amino acid, and it's tasteless essentially.
Mm.
We have literally just put, it's like the gin on the rim of the glass, right? We've literally just put a couple of drops of flavoring in, just through market research. We found out through market research that anglers are more likely to buy something with a kind of a general kind of flavor or note or
Definitely,
tone.
yeah.
Yeah, so if they've got a sweet bait, they'll probably go for the sweet cream, and we've purposely chosen kind of neutral, subtle flavors, right? So we got a fish one, we got a sweet cream one, we got fish, sweet cream, and fruit. Yeah, so they're all very subtle, and we didn't go for any outrageous choices, right? Just middle of the road, simple flavors that would match or complement any of your own bait. So if you're using like a spicy plum, I don't know, I'm making something up here,
Hmm.
you go with the fruit. If you're using the milk protein bait, go with sweet cream, stuff like that. So yeah, so they're
Although
perfect.
essentially that is just in the angler's head. It doesn't matter. You could use
Yeah, so it's
the
just
fruit
basically
with a milk.
just a
Yeah, it
match.
doesn't matter.
Yeah, I
Does it?
mean, if the flavor isn't your cup of tea, just use the original, right? But like just our market research showed that anglers would
Yeah.
really like to have a little, just a subtle flavor. It's like it's less than 1% of the bottle is flavor. So,
Yeah, I didn't know if you looked into those flavors and if they somehow worked hand in hand with the amino acids, but I think you've answered that.
well, yeah, I mean, amino acid. It's interesting. We talked about it like 2 years ago, right? It was like long time. But what happened is that long range attraction is more or less flavor, right? And short
Yeah.
range stimulation is amino acids.
Yeah,
So they
so
work very well as a 1-2 punch. Yeah, so I'd recommend everyone who fishes with the bait also use it with some kind of flavoring of some sort, because that's what brings fish into the area more or less. That flavor will carry further than the amino acid as well.
yeah, I think I probably asked you on the last episode,
Yeah.
how far can it carry? It was
Ah, it's
so hard to answer, isn't it?
at the time it's a great idea. It's a great conversation we had last time, because at the time the answer was a very short distance. And if you remember, I mentioned that when I go fishing, I I start, because when I'm doing my research, I research, right? When I'm just fishing, practicing and testing different things, I use a match pole, right? A carp pole. So I'm fishing at 11 meters with a pole cup and all that.
Yeah.
And the first thing I do is I just get like a can of cream corn, right? Put it in my pole cup and put a big squirt of pineapple in there. That goes in, right, when I'm setting up. And then that flavor starts to bring the fish from far and wide to kind of investigate, right? And then once I plumbed up and everything, then goes the bait, and the bait has the amino acid on it, because the amino acid is more of a short range thing. So if they're within a couple of feet of it, they'll get stimulated. And that was at the time the way to do it. But now with this new product where you can put in as much as you want, literally without overdosing the fish, if you put more in, it will have a longer reach. So you may have like I'm not talking like hundreds of yards, maybe probably 10 yards perhaps, right? If you put in enough. So it is a bit longer range now because you can put in more. And remember that it's the concentration of the amino that turns them on. So if you put
Yeah.
in more, it's very concentrated around your hook, and as you go further out, it's less. So
And,
there
and
is a
is
limit
this,
to it.
yeah, is this mostly through ionization, in your opinion, or something else?
Well, it's interesting. Ionization is one of those words that kind of appears in the literature, and people are kind of, have different definitions of what that means, right? So all amino acids are actually ions, right? It
Yeah.
means they have because what happens? Okay, so I'm going to give you a chemistry word, right? And the chemistry word is Zwitter. Z, sorry.
Hmm.
I've been here 20 years. So, Zwitter, Zwitter ion. That means the molecule itself, the amino acid, will become a plus ion at one end and a minus ion at the other end, which is
Yeah.
kind of unique. And that's why amino acids are super soluble. So amino acids are always ionized in water. All right. And that's what increases solubility. So anything that's ionic, salt, for example, sodium chloride is super soluble because it's made of ions, right? So all ionic materials, more or less, are soluble in water. And amino acids turn into ions when they get into water. So yes, they undergo ionization. Yeah. So that's the process of making ions. Yeah. So ions are kind of it's not like a thing that determines their potency. It's just a thing that always happens, right? So it's it's a thing that's always in the background. It's not really anything to do with the stimulatory effect, whether or not it's an ion. It's not. It does affect solubility, but it doesn't affect potency
Got you.
of amino acids, right? Some things, acids, for example, citric acid, right? Citric acid is like attractive to carp, because it has that kind of nice, kind of like sour, kind of acidic taste that carp like. And that's because it makes ions. I mean, the H plus ion is the acidic ion, which falls off citric acid and goes into the water. So there is local kind of sour taste, which is the taste
Yeah,
of
and
the ions.
pH
On your
shift.
tongue, you have an H plus receptor, right? So we talked about taste earlier, right? So the salty taste is the sodium ion on your tongue. The sour taste is the H plus ion from acids on your tongue, right? So those taste receptors are super simple. They just detect sodium ions and hydrogen ions, salt and acid, right?
Yeah, very interesting. And presumably a pH change comes into this as well.
That's kind of an interesting one as well, because you will have a local, and it's only a local around the bait, kind of very kind of like time dependent, it'll wear off quick. You'll
Yeah.
get like a very slight change in pH as the ions are released, right? But here's what people tend to forget. Most bodies of water are actually buffered, meaning that there's carbonates, typically calcium carbonate, sodium carbonate, chalk, essentially limestone, right? And carbonates dissolved in water are buffers. They make the pH stay at the same level, right? So you get a little spike when you throw some acid in, but then the buffer will get hold of it and neutralize it. So
Mm.
any body of water will maintain its pH because of buffers. And it's the same buffer in your body, right? What keeps your blood at pH 7.4 is the hydrogen carbonate buffer. And that's the same buffer in the pond because it's just what's in rocks, right? So yeah, so that there are no dramatic pH changes, right, for a long period of time. You can't maintain a certain pH in an area because of buffers.
Of course, yeah. But there can be a localized pH
Oh
change.
yeah, as soon as
So
it dissolves, if you just throw in a bunch of citric acid in the solid form, right, and it dissolved, those H plus ions would come off, and right there'd be a low pH because it's acidic. But then it would interact with the buffer pretty quickly and quickly dissipate.
and presumably you could use something. I mean, I wouldn't necessarily recommend chucking in the citric acid, but you could use something like that coinciding with amino acids to act as a investigatory
Oh, okay.
trigger.
I'm going to tell you. You want to know kind of a really interesting thing about ions and amino acids? This is kind of high tech. All
Yeah,
right.
go for it.
So
Yeah.
it's not so much the acid that's important; it's the salt that's important. You ever watched and there's been a lot of this. I remember watching a Kevin Nash video one time where he actually was using a lot of rock salt with his bait, and he was claiming correctly, I think, that the salt was actually enhancing his catch rate.
Mm.
And there's a reason for that because amino acids, when they bind to the receptor, it's not like turning on a light switch. What it actually does is it opens what's called an ion channel. It's like a door, right? So think of the amino acid like a key. It engages the lock, which is the receptor, and then literally it's called a ligand gated ion channel, right? It's a little hole that opens from the outside world, the pond, to the inside world of the fish. And it's a tiny little hole, right? And it's just wide enough for sodium ions, which come from table salt, to pass through. Now, when you pass an ion across what's called a membrane, you get a voltage, right? Because there's now more pluses on one side than the other. And that's what signals a nerve impulse, right? So the presence of extra sodium ions, in other words, putting salt with your bait, increases the potency of the amino acid effect because it always allows for a kind of reservoir of sodiums that can go into the, through the channel, I should say. So that's why I think there is definitely, you hit a nail on the head there. There is definitely a connection between sodium ions and amino acid activity, but not H plus, not acids.
Gotcha. Do you think
that's a bit technical?
No. That's it's still quite.
Yeah, so I like, if it's a little trick for folks, if you are going to use an amino acid, you can actually kind of up it a little bit in terms of its effectiveness by adding a little bit of salt.
Yeah. It is actually quite straightforward, isn't it? Once you get your head around it.
Yeah, I mean, it's all about investing the time. So, like, if I'm going to give some advice to your listeners, it's like, download the article, print it, go sit next to a nice warm fire, right, in the quiet for a couple of hours and start reading it. And when you get a little bit tired of reading it, stop, because there's a lot to kind of digest. And when it's like, it's like reading a technical manual, right? You don't read it through like a book. You just read it through until you get like, oh, I've had enough. And then you come back to it later after you processed it. And once you get through all the pages and it makes sense, you go, oh my God, that was so simple, right? But it's getting over that barrier, the barrier of kind of the unknown, right? Because you've never seen it before and you got to think about it. And what does that mean, right? And once you kind of get that all sorted out, it's actually very straightforward.
Yeah. It's just, as you say, it's just getting your head around it, isn't it?
Yeah. It's understanding, when I first started to do this research, I'm a chemist, as I think I mentioned, right? And this is really biology I'm researching, right? So I had to teach myself all about neural processes in biology. And that sounds very daunting. And it was. I was reading these papers, looking at all these terms and all these things. It's like, what the hell are they talking about? And then I just kept reading it and read it a couple of times. Oh, okay, that's what they're talking about. And I think anglers will have the same experience. I mean, if you think you're going to read the paper once through and understand it, probably not, right? But if you read it like, a couple of pages at a time, think about it, then just read the next. It's like a technical manual, like I said. It's like you'll get programmed. You'll understand what's actually going on in the fish and why this product does what it does.
Yeah. Do you think there's anything more stimulatory in terms of inducing feeding than amino acids for carp?
In terms of amino acids, yes, I do. So, if I'm looking at if you happen to have the paper with you and you look at page 27, it shows this heat map, right? And it shows you the level of stimulation based on ratio of amino acid to blocker. You can fine tune your level of stimulation based on ratio. And, I'm very tempted sometimes to switch the ratio up so it's super stimulatory, and I'd video the fish going bananas, right? They'd be digging a hole in the gravel and like swimming around and everything. It'd be crazy, right? And that's what Kevin saw a little bit in some of his research, right? But to be honest, that's not what you want when you're fishing. You don't want the insane, highly skewed ratio of blocker to amino acid. You want something that's a bit tempered, a bit kind of calmed down, because you want them to be actively browsing, right? You've been in this situation probably when you get like a jacuzzi, they call it, in front of you, getting line bites and all this kind of stuff. You don't want the fish tearing around, digging up the bottom, going crazy. You want them to be like 3 cups of coffee, not 30 cups of coffee. Yeah. So we've purposely chosen a ratio that gives the optimal catch rate by not making them go crazy, right? It looks good on camera if you make them go crazy. You think, oh, that's awesome. But in a fishing situation, it's a nightmare, right? So we have that capability. We have the capability to make them go nuts, but we don't ever use it because it's too much. It's too much of a good thing. We want to kind of get it so it's just perfect. It's just active browsing. That's what you want, active browsing.
Yeah, but unless you're fishing single hook bait, right?
Oh, yeah, that would work. It's interesting if you have a single hook bait, but then you get the you've probably had this experience, more match anglers, I think. You get like hooking outside the mouth and that because they're biting too fast. You want, honestly, if I'm going to say that you want to stick to the active browsing, because you'll get slow, steady, hookable takes rather than hooking outside the mouth when they're kind of like, darting around. Yeah, because I understand where you're coming from. With a single hook bait, I think I understand your question better. So single hook bait, you're saying, oh, you put a lot on it, but then when it kind of dilutes out, it's the right level. I think that's what you're saying. Is that right?
Well, yeah, I mean,
Yeah,
you're saying it's a nightmare if the food is too attractive, presumably
yeah,
because they're frantically going around mopping
yeah,
up every food morsel. But if there's one singular source of
yeah.
this attraction, they'll be able to track that back to that one bait and then presumably eat that with gusto, which obviously helps rig mechanics, etc.
It's you're on the right track, but how I say it is this: so it's all about the ratio, not about the amount, right? So you're thinking, oh, I'll put more in there and they'll be more active, right? That's not how it is. You can put the world supply in there. If it's at the right
N-
ratio, it'll be like moderately
not
stimulatory.
not more. No, I didn't mean
Yeah,
that.
I didn't mean more. Yeah, so we purposely want to keep that ratio active browsing, right?
Okay.
Yeah. And to be honest, I mean, you want a lot. You want a lot of something that's just optimal, not a little bit of something that's over.
Yeah.
Yeah. Does that make sense?
It makes perfect sense. Yeah, it makes
Yeah.
perfect sense.
Yeah. I don't think it's to be honest, I don't think it's possible to kind of make well, I don't know. I mean, if you, I've talked to a couple of anglers about this, and when we had some trials, we had some, it's great when you start talking to anglers because they come up with some super ideas, right? So, like, what they were doing is they were like taking their base mix and they were kind of soaking the base mix in the impulse liquid and then rolling it, their bullies around in it and then drying it. So it'll be like those cultured baits, right? So they had like a super attractive kind of soluble skin on their boilie, right? And then they'd cast that out and it worked great because the body would land and then the kind of the coating would kind of fall off a bit like a paste wrap, right? Essentially, so basically they're making their own kind of pseudo paste wrap. And this is why Mark and I, we saw this in action. Well, Mark did. And we said, oh, that would be, that works great for a paste, right? And this is, barbel anglers love this. We've got a few barbel anglers that like to buy the paste because it kind of sits around their hook bait. And in a river, you're worried about washout, right? The product washing out, but the paste, because it's kind of super, you know, doughy, it's got a lot of liquid in it, right? It maintains kind of a lot of load of amino acid and it
Yeah.
leaks out over a long period of time. So,
Yeah.
if you're worried about that, I would say if you're going to fish for a long period of time, use a paste wrap or
Mm.
the soluble boilies we mentioned.
Yeah. I've got some of your paste in front of me.
Yeah.
It's the fish one. It
Mm.
really it smells. If that is just a flavor and not actually
Yeah.
a fish meal, it smells very, very
No,
natural.
there's fish meal in there, I
There is
think. I
fish
mean,
meal.
I have to talk to Mark about it because when you make a paste like that, you have to have some kind of ingredient, right? So I think
Yeah,
he's
of
got some kind
course.
of meal in there. Yeah. I mean, he's the expert with the bait prep. So if anyone has a question about what's in the paste, info@biosourcebaits.com, Mark will send you an email back.
Mm.
Yeah.
Is
But
there
I
any?
think I remember there's definitely some kind of fish meal in it. Don't quote me, but I think that's
It
right.
smells like there is. Yeah,
Yeah.
it really
Yeah.
does. Yeah.
Yeah.
Is there any substance that is more attractive to carp than an amino acid?
I think methamphetamine, maybe. That's a
Really?
joke. Nothing that I know of in terms of a food base, no.
Okay.
Um, I know there are other things. Oh, I'm going to tell you that controversial, right? Ready?
Go.
Pheromones. That's what's more
Yeah.
attractive.
Ooh,
Yeah.
watch out.
Yeah. So, like,
Yeah.
that is kind of like that's out of bounds attractive, right?
Yeah.
So, and it's, verging on immoral, to be honest. But I've never actually ever, it's hard to get them anyway here. I can't even buy them. I wouldn't anyway. But if there was one thing out there more attractive than aminos, it would probably be pheromones.
Yeah. But I mean, really, they're engaging their brain in a different
Yeah,
kind of
yeah.
neurochemistry rather than a feed.
It's like crack, really. It's
Yeah.
just yeah, because like fish are wired to eat and have sex, right?
Of course.
Sounds
Yeah.
like a Saturday night in Cheltenham. That's where I'm from.
Are you from Cheltenham? Is that
My brother and my mother live in Cheltenham, and I lived there briefly before I came to the States. Yeah,
that
so
was it?
I have an affection for Gloucestershire and Cheltenham. Yeah,
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
yeah.
Yeah. Um, okay. I mean, have you obviously your testing is very extensive with what you do, obviously with amino acids. Do you or have you in the past tested other things, more traditional ingredients, yeasts, things like that?
Yeah, so what have I done in the past? Not really. It's interesting because I'm not so much interested in the nutritional profile of a bait. I'm more interested in its porosity, its solubility, kind of more physical properties rather than taste and smell. So one of my goals has always been, and this is kind of an aquaculture thing, so fish farming, right? So fish farms use, we're all familiar with the scratings, pellets and things like that, right? So those pellets are made from fish meal typically, and the fish love them, right? I mean, nutritionally balanced, fish grow well, good, right? But there's kind of a movement in aquaculture to kind of use a lower grade pellet, right? So when they start using bone meal, for example, which is much cheaper but not as nutritional, but if you eat more of them, it's the same kind of nutrition. So they want to kind of switch over to a kind of a cheaper pellet sometimes, but the fish won't eat them, right? Because they don't taste good. So the thing has been, well, let's take our cheap, not so tasty pellet and put some amino acid in it, and the fish will eat it. And that's kind of the philosophy I take with me when I fish. So when I use pellets here, they're not like high end, carp pellets from the fish shop. They're actually real cheap, buy them in 25-kilo bag horse pellets, right? And they're just like very, very simple, like compressed soybean meal and stuff like that, cheap ingredients, right? So it's literally a tasteless kind of like bread product, right? And I want it that way because I don't want the pellets to be super attractive. I want them to become attractive as carriers of the amino acid. So the pellets are purposely dull because their entire job is just to get amino acids to the bottom and then like exude them and not get eaten, right? So the longer they stay on the bottom and like disintegrate, the more amino acid I get into the swim. So I don't want those pellets to be eaten quickly. Fish will eat them, of course, right? But they're not super palatable. They're kind of very bland, right? If I'd use kind of like nicer kind of fish meal pellets, they get eaten quicker. And I want them to kind of be depth charges. I want them to kind of exude the aminos.
Mm-hmm. So you've never tried things in your tank testing, sort of like Marmite, different fish meals, things like that?
No, it's interesting because I very, very rarely, I have way back in the day, I use expander pellets, right? As a sponge, really. But ever since then, I've used the Maddox technique of just dissolving an amino acid into a solution of water, make a solution with water, and then just dribble it into the tank, and it saturates the gravel, and then just watch the fish's reaction to the amino acid. Because if you start putting food in there, it's like, well, is it the food or is it the amino acid? You can test the food by itself, but my focus has always been
It's not your
enhancing
interest,
food
is it?
baits. Yeah,
Yeah, of course. Yeah.
yeah. So I time is limited. So
Yeah. Yeah, of
yeah,
course. No, of
yeah.
course. So, I mean, you're obviously a very scientific, thorough scientist.
Oh, that's a compliment.
What,
Thanks.
what is your testing protocol? What is your
Oh,
process for testing things?
okay. I have a research group here at the college, and in my research room, I have four 55-gallon fish tanks.
Hmm.
And I don't know if you remember back in the day when you took a chemistry class in high school or even college, there were these things called burettes. Do you remember those things?
Yeah,
Like a
of
big
course.
tube, and it empties from the bottom.
Yeah.
And it allows, and I've bought these special burettes. They're called dosing burettes. They're used by pharmacists, chemists, if you like, to dispense like larger volumes of liquids. And so I use that large burette to dispense 150 milliliters of my solution at a time through a pipe, just like Kevin Maddox's experiment, into a special diffusing apparatus, which is like a little cup with gravel in it, right? So the cup is 120 milliliters. I put 150 milliliters of solution in it, so it just overflows just a little bit, and then that's perfect. Then I've kind of primed that little area there, and this cup sits under the gravel, and you watch the fish's reaction to that, and we film it. It's kind of interesting because we film the response, and then once we've because you can't just look at it because you become like you have confirmational bias, right? So students want to see things, and guess what? If you want to see something, you'll see it, right? So we actually video every single time, and when we video, we turn the room lights off so the fish can't see us. It's like it's like that, that one-way mirror when you see it on the cop shows,
Yeah.
So, yeah, the fish can't see us, we can see them. And to be honest, they're a bit more. It's more. They have more natural behavior when the lights are off. Yeah, you have to sit there for 5 minutes to get used to the light level. Yeah. So then we, student doses, cameras on. You usually see the because it's very weird because you got to be, and this is kind of the fine tuning of the system, right? So you got about 3 minutes after the amino acid goes in there. That's the magic window where you see a fish come over or not, because past 3 minutes or so, because it's such a small volume, 55 gallons, the tank fills. They spread out, right? The amino acids fill out to the whole tank, and then they could be biting the glass or something. And you got to kind of get that localized kind of response, which Kevin saw, right? So we're literally Kevin got the correct technique down. We've modernized it just a little bit with like more specialized equipment, but it's the way to go. And the important thing is it happens right away. As soon as the amino acid goes in and they get a sniff of it, they go over. All right. So this is how we're able to kind of establish kind of lower limits of concentration. We kind of we do a kind of like a stepwise addition. So we do a real low concentration first, then higher, 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 and you get to the point where suddenly a switch goes off and you hit threshold, and that's where we know where the thresholds are. And they'll come over and they'll start to bite away. And then, for singles, if you keep going, they'll turn off almost immediately because of the narrow window. But when we use the blocker, they just keep going over for 10 times, 100 times, 1,000 times stronger. They're still going. So
there's no risk of them associating the lights turning off with some kind of stimulus.
It's a good question. So yeah, we try and sometimes we do like a placebo, right? So we do like a just water.
Right.
Yeah. And I also feed them at night, right? So when I go home, I feed them, and I turn the light on sometimes, turn the light off sometimes, so they never see it coming, right? They don't.
Right.
I'll tell you what they do recognize as food. Me.
Yeah.
They see the English bloke approaching the tank, and they swim to the top, just like any pet fish would, right?
Yeah.
But when you turn the tank off, when you turn the light off, they can't see you. So and to be honest, you can tell. It's interesting if you ever look at fish in a tank and you turn the light off. It takes probably 5 to 10 minutes for them to become active, and they start swimming around like it's nighttime, and they can't, and they feel totally comfortable, right?
And why is that?
I don't know, I think it goes back to nature. Why do we catch fish at dawn and dusk? Because in the middle of the day they can be seen by predators more easily, right? So I think fish are naturally more active when they can't be seen easily, right? So I hear all these stories about match fishermen who fish in the margins in 8 inches of water, and I think, well, if that was clear water, they wouldn't be there. But then you look at these muddy carp puddles, and it's the visibility is a quarter of an inch, right? So yeah, you see these fish in the margins with their fins out of the water, and the predators can't see them literally if their fins are under the water because the visibility is so bad. But here in the States, we have in the fish tank we have very clear water, so it's kind of trickier.
Yeah, definitely. Okay, sorry, bear with me a moment. Sneeze there. Sorry, Patrick.
Do you have a sneeze button? You're a professional. You have a sneeze button.
Yeah, I was just going to say your article, which I'm looking through now.
Yeah.
It's got so this is obviously in reference to Kevin Maddox.
Yeah.
Kevin Maddox's trials. You've got the amino acid table here. But there's only, I think, 17 amino acids there.
Yeah, he didn't test all of them.
Right. Okay.
Yeah.
But you have, obviously.
No, I concentrate on the best ones, to be honest. So
you haven't tested the other 3 because they don't fall in the
Actually, I will tell you one thing. There are a couple of minor corrections to Kevin's table, but because what else is interesting is that Kevin's table came out in the mid-80s, and then there are a bunch of academic studies literally years later which literally gave the same result, right? So if you want to go and look up Kevin's table kind of done scientifically, you can find that there's an author called Saglio and there's one called Caprio. Caprio does catfish, Saglio does carp, and they basically came up with the same table. So Kevin's results were confirmed independently by other groups who tested again, they tend not to test all of them because it's a lot of work, 20 amino acids, right? So they tend to take representative samples, right? So they don't test all the neutral ones, they test 3 or 4, right? Stuff like that.
Yeah.
So, but for the basic, they can test all of them because there's only 3 or 4 basics, right? And there's only a couple of acidic ones. So they can test the basic and acidic, all of them. And then the polar and the neutral, there's lots of them. So they be a bit more selective. Yeah, but to be honest, there is a very, very minor correction in Kevin's table, and it may be kind of controversial, but I think he muddled up asparagine and arginine, right? Because it makes no sense
Yes, yeah.
where they are. So if those two are switched, it absolutely fits our model, right? So, and to be honest, I thought I'd test that. I thought I'd test arginine, right, which is the basic amino acid, but its solubility is really, really poor, so it's really hard to test. So that wouldn't be one, even though it's basic, it wouldn't be one we would use because you couldn't get a lot in the water. Yeah.
Would you say that using arginine with other amino acids would be a good route to take or not?
No, because at the end of the day, you want a super soluble amino acid. You want as much amino acid as possible dissolved, because then you can add like literally a few milliliters, right? If you have something that's 100 times less soluble, you've got to add 100 times more for the same effect. So instead of 30 milliliters, it's 3 liters, right? So
Yeah.
this is why I've always concentrated at the top end of the table, valine and lysine, right? Because they're the most potent and they're also quite soluble, right? Other ones, for example, even though it's quoted as being poor, MSG, glutamic acid, actually does work for carp at super, super, super high concentrations. I won't get into the details why, but the no reaction is actually a very weak reaction from Kevin's table. And aside from that, there are no reactions. It's just very, very weak. And the switch of arginine and asparagine, it's perfect. It's exactly how nature is. So well done, Kevin. 1984
Yeah.
in his living room. Imagine it. Some guy just by himself in his living room figured all that out in
Oh,
1984.
amazing. Yeah,
Yeah,
yeah, yeah.
it's amazing. Yeah.
Yeah. Um, you only use one amino acid in your product
Ah,
line.
well, currently we
Oh,
use one amino acid and the blocker, right, in
yep.
impulse. We use one amino acid and the blocker in catatonic. So a carb favorable basic amino, right?
Mm.
Read between the lines.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And literally MSG, right? So catfish, MSG, and blocker, right? That's your catfish. That's your, well, impulse is everything, right? For the other two inventions, which are species specific, you have to mix acid and base and blocker in a specific ratio to get it to work,
Mm.
right? So that's what we're working on right now. So we're moving from a binary blend, we call it, to a ternary or like three blend, right? So that's the secret. So as we go to 3 amino acids, we'll get species specific attractants.
So what I was going to ask is because you no longer using an amino acid combination blend,
Yeah.
obviously feel free not to, but are you happy to tell people the two aminos you were using in your old product?
I'll give you a big clue. One of them was obviously lysine,
Of
right?
course.
And remember we talked about the receptor being basic and neutral?
Yep.
You can choose virtually any of the neutral amino acids.
And it wouldn't matter.
No, the trick is to get them in the right amount, right? So,
Right. Okay.
yeah.
Gotcha.
Yeah, so to be honest, I'm not giving away the farm there. I actually say in Carp Fever Revisited essentially what we've just said, right? I kind of literally joke about it and say, hey, I've just given away the farm. Well, not really, because we've moved on and we've
Of
improved it,
course.
right?
Yeah.
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 Yeah. So, I'm welcome to kind of like vaguely discuss old products, right?
Yeah.
But yeah.
Yeah. So
Yeah.
in your own testing, does it
Mhm.
you're saying it pretty much completely mirrors Kevin Maddox's testings? So
Yeah. Well,
valine
for the
and
singles,
lysine.
yeah. I mean, honestly, sorry to interrupt, but for the singles, yes, it does. But we've moved away from singles now.
Yeah, of course.
It
Yeah.
was a nice thing just to get just to prove that the tanks were set up right, and it is nice to prove where the thresholds come. So, for example, I'm going to give you some chemistry numbers, right? So, for example, the excellent potency ones, it's in chemistry terms, its concentration is, well, let's use a phrase which we'll kind of understand. 1/10 millionth of a standard concentration, right? Okay, so 1/10 millionth of a standard concentration is the most potent. Then it goes orders of magnitude. So then it's a millionth, then it's 100,000th,
Mhm.
and that kind of like order of magnitude is each column, right? So each time you get more potent, you need 10 times less essentially.
Yeah, of course.
Yeah, I mean, for those who have taken like a chemistry or a biology course in high school, they'll know what the standard unit of concentration is in chemistry. I don't want to blind people with science, so
Mm.
it's just like I use the phrase molar, right? So like a 10 to the minus 7 moles per liter is the threshold for the potent ones, 10 to the minus 6 for the medium, 10 to the minus 5 for the weaker. So you go through 3 orders of magnitude.
Yeah.
Yeah.
In terms of, I know I'm constantly switching gears here,
That's right.
but it's just there's so many ideas popping into my
Yeah.
head that I want to make sure I ask them all. Um, Receptors in older carp, do
Yes.
you believe they have the ability, or that they at least might either change or switch on and off, or increase density, maybe something like that?
Okay. So, you know, I don't think it's necessarily proven, but I got some ideas, right?
Mm,
So as you know, obviously as creatures grow, they get bigger, right?
hmm.
So as carp become bigger and bigger and bigger, it's my belief, and I think it's shared by many, that they get more and more and more receptors. All right. So as carp get bigger, they get more sensitive to amino acids. And we mentioned it earlier, but there's something in biology called upregulation and downregulation, right? So the carp can either increase the amount of basic neutral receptor or decrease the amount of basic neutral receptor based on what it needs. This is my opinion, right? So based on what it needs in terms of its environment, it can either have more receptors or less. And that tuning only happens over time as they get used to their environment. Similarly with the acidic polar receptor, which is the other receptor that can go up and down. But we're really talking about the basic neutral for carp. So once they, and this is an interesting one because in the literature it says, oh, carp in Russia have different amino acid kind of like receptors than carp in Europe. No, they don't. They just have different numbers, right? They all have the basic neutral, and the amount of basic neutral receptor density increases or decreases based on, if you like, what the food in their pond is throwing at them, right? So if there's a lot of amino acids in the water, they need less receptors to be optimal. If there's if it's a poor water in terms of food quality and quantity, they're going to need more to find it. So I think that upregulation or downregulation of the receptor is what's really happening in older fish, right? So either if there's not much food, more receptors. If there's loads of food, less receptors. I think in commercial waters, when there's tons of boilies going in there, the amount of receptors will start to diminish probably because there's so much food.
So you're saying it's not so much to do with the age of the fish, it's the environment that the fish is
Yeah.
within.
So it's what I think they're fine tuning their density of receptors to their environment. How many receptors do I need to get the job done? Essentially, it's a bit like weight training, right? If you don't train with weights, you lose all your muscle because you don't need the muscle. But as soon as you start working out, you grow muscle because your body says, "Oh, I've got to lift, this amount of weight today." So you train your body through necessity, right? So if you need the receptors, the carp will upregulate. They'll make some. If they don't need them, they'll downregulate. So
Mm.
that's my opinion, and that's just comes from talking to a few biologists about it.
It's very interesting.
Yeah, yeah, it goes
Yeah.
back to that whole idea that the receptor set is fine tuned to not only type of food. We talked about like carp being omnivore kind of grazers, right? So they have this BN receptor, not the other one that catfish have. And then how rich is the environment? If there's lots of food, there'll be less of them. If there's more, if there's more food, less of them, less food, more of them.
So let's take a lake, for example. When
Yeah,
I'm fishing, several hundred lake acres, there's at least two carp in there that are probably nudging 40 years old. There's
yeah,
also some carp in there that are probably around about, they're barely 10 years old.
right.
Because the environment is the same, even though they're very different in age, you would
Yeah.
kind of guess that their receptor sites density and activity would be pretty much the same, right?
Well, I think they would start the same, but then the older fish will have more time to adapt, right? So the
Yeah.
question is really, how long does it take a carp to adapt perfectly to its environment?
Yeah.
That's an open-ended question. Who
Mm,
knows? Is it a year? Is it 10 years? Right?
mm.
And also, as we age, things start to fail, right?
Yeah,
So
yeah.
here I am, sitting here with my glasses on, and I'm probably going to have a hearing aid in a year or two, right? So, as you get older, things start to fall apart. So it may be just the aging effect of older carp where they, naturally have less receptors because they're just getting older, you know.
Right. Okay. Interesting.
Yeah.
Very interesting. I think, I mean, obviously, you are extremely extremely intelligent, extremely science driven in your
Ah,
angling.
you haven't been talking to my wife, have you? She doesn't share that opinion.
Does she not?
I'm joking. I love my wife.
She'll have to tune in.
I'm not going to let her listen to this podcast now.
So, I mean, I think we're possibly on different ends of the angling spectrum in many ways, right? So,
Yeah.
what would you, how can I phrase this? What do you think someone like me would benefit from bringing into their own angling? So I'm very
Okay.
much I'm very interested by science.
Yeah, me too.
I'm somewhat I know you are. I'm somewhat scientifically minded,
Yeah.
but I'm
Okay.
very much about going out there, doing it, seeing what
Yeah.
works, and just
Yeah.
testing things
You know,
relentlessly.
we call people who have kind of a natural interest citizen scientists here, right? So I'm a citizen scientist. I have this natural curiosity and I go out fishing and I don't go fishing, I go experimenting. I just try different things. I think
Yeah.
you're probably the same way. Um, but the trouble is with amino acids is it's a long, big learning curve. There's so much to learn and you learn I learn something new every day, right? I learned something just 3 days ago, which kind of like was a light bulb moment. So I'm always discovering new things and making papers and things like that. And to be honest, it's been a 20-year journey, right? Now, so here's my kind of observation. So either you can go on the 20-year journey and discover all this yourself, right? Or you can listen to the guy who's already done it, right? I don't want to kind of blow my own trumpet too much, but the information is already there. And we talked about, if you really read these articles I've written and other academic journals which are referenced, you'll pretty much in just a couple of weeks, maybe a couple of months, pick up all the information you need. You won't have to reinvent the wheel. It's already been invented. No need to reinvent it, right? And people will say to me, "Oh, what happens if I put this amino acid in this thing and this, that, and the other?" I go, "Like, just read the paper. I mean, don't try and figure it out from just first principles, right? So if it's been solved, just go look it up. Don't try and
No,
reinvent the wheel."
yeah, I get that.
Yeah,
I guess a different way to ask is
yeah,
what how would perhaps a more kind of I don't know how to say this. I really don't know how to sum it up, but an angler that's very much first and foremost they're an angler, right? They are going out. Perhaps they're not wanting to test the water. They're not wanting to
yeah,
go in and try this. And there's not the abundance of fish in front of them.
right,
They're perhaps going out and perhaps they'll only catch 3 or 4 carp a year.
right.
Maybe a few more, but what would it mean to those anglers? What can they do? Because that's a very different type of angling to what you do, of course, because you couldn't
Yeah,
do the work that you do if you were doing that
yeah,
type of angling. What does it all mean for that type of angler?
yeah. If you're catching just a few big fish per year, you're going to be waiting a long time between bites, right?
Of course.
So it's all about attraction, and then when they get there, because they can, these big wise old fish, they'll come into a baited area and then they'll like think, oh, something's up, and they'll just like leave, won't they, without picking up the bait.
Yeah.
So I think, to be honest, we've talked about it a little bit. The first thing, personally, if I was trying to catch a big fish and I'm like targeting a big fish and it's going to take a big campaign, several months to catch it, I would use, an attractant, right? Like a flavor, try and get them in the area, right? Something subtle, maybe. I don't know. But then I'd make sure that when the fish get to my baited area, they pick up a bait. And how would they pick up a bait? Well, I'd make sure it's got an amino acid package with it, right? Because once they get close to it and they get that on signal,
Yeah.
they really have to eat it at that point. So, we have lots of like reported kind of things of anglers catching like the venue record fish many times over on our products because the fish has come in and it's just been triggered. It just picks up the bait, right? So making sure that amino acid package is there for a long period of time is kind of tricky, isn't it? Right. So my recommendation would be, yeah, use the solubles, use the glugs. And I know you don't want to put a lot of food in, you want your boilie to be there. So the question is really, well, how do I get the amino acid in the area? Well, you got to use the solubles. I think that's probably and we are looking for people to actually start making these things. I'm sure that's the future is getting that depth charge down there. So it
Mm.
takes the stuff down there, deposit it, and then it's not a food item anymore. much like the low food value pellets I mentioned earlier.
Yeah. So yeah, it is when you were saying earlier about you wouldn't want to change the ratio of the blocker and amino acid to be
Right,
too stimulatory, right?
right.
I kind of think of all the times that I've witnessed.
Yeah.
I'm thinking of one particular fish at the moment.
Yeah, Sam,
That annoyingly go.
you're starting to win me over a little bit because like if you really want to trigger that really
Yeah.
kind of
Let,
cagey one. But
let's.
I'm not saying you want a jacuzzi, right? So maybe like up it just a shade, right? And it's kind of interesting. I like this conversation because different fish have different temperaments, right? So it's
Mm.
easy to catch the small ones, isn't it? Because they're they put like fear to the wind and off they go, right? But the big ones they're a bit cagey, aren't they? So yeah, that little
They
extra
can.
kind of like kick might be worth it.
Yeah. Yeah.
So if Mark's listening, hey Mark, big fish blend.
I mean,
He's gonna email me like literally 5 minutes after listening to this.
so the mere, right? Let's take the mere for example. There was this kind of mythical common, never got
Right,
caught,
right,
but it was seen. It was definitely in there. It just
right,
would not take angler's bait.
right.
I've experienced this, not at that venue, but on lakes that I'm fishing.
Yeah,
This is something that happens. It just seems that even though
yeah,
these fish might be very big, they're clearly eating
right.
adequate amounts of food. They will just
Yeah,
not take angler's baits.
interesting.
In that kind of scenario,
Yeah.
are you not tempted to just crank it up to 100? Just it would it not warrant
You know what you if you did crank it up to 100, you definitely get a response, but would it be the
percent?
response you wanted? Because you may foul hook it, you may miss the bite because it's kind of it's kind of like biting too quick. Yeah. So I mean, I'm kind of like just based on what I've seen, I'm kind of steady on the active searching
Mm-mm.
because that's the optimal because they're going down and picking stuff up, right? They're feeding, right? They're feeding. They're just not digging a hole. You don't want them to dig a hole.
But what happens if they're not feeding? They're coming in, they're inspecting
But
the
then
food.
they're stimulated by the aminos to become active, right?
Mm.
Yeah. So I mean, I understand you want. I understand exactly where you're coming from. And like it's a great conversation because if their receptor density is lower, they need more stimulant, right?
Yeah,
So
it's yeah,
yeah,
yeah.
yeah,
And in the same respect, I mean, I think, I would also think these big old wily fish, probably wouldn't respond well to an over stimulatory bait as well. I mean, I understand that side of the argument completely. But
yeah,
I just think it's very different trying to lure these types of fish in
yeah. I mean, it's
compared
an
to
undiscovered
commercials.
country, isn't it? Yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
It's an interesting. Yeah.
Mm.
Yeah, because all my tests, honestly, all my tests are done on smaller fish because I want the statistics. I want to catch like 40 fish
Yeah.
and I want to see that 30-10 ratio or whatever it is, right? So,
Yeah, I get that. No, I get that. And that's what I respectfully mean.
yeah,
Perhaps on different end of the
yeah.
the spectrum to
Yeah,
some
that
offenders.
research, it's interesting. That research has not been done. So it's interesting.
Yeah. And just to backtrack a little bit, you said about you think you making or you pairing up with a company to make some kind of soluble bait would be
Yeah,
the way to go.
yeah.
Why not just create a pellet?
Yeah, that's one of the options. So one of my ideas long ago was I actually contacted a pellet manufacturer here in the United States and I went over to visit them and the minimum order was 10 tons. And I can't get 10 tons of pellet in the basement, right? So what I would do in that case, and this is not true for manufacturers who can make their own pellets. What you do, you get your base mix, you throw the amino acid powder in the base mix it thoroughly, and then you extrude the pellets so they're impregnated inside, right? If you wish, you can then also exterior coat them. But the bottom line is, as they decompose, as they fall apart, the amino acids are released slowly. So
Say that
my
again.
idea is kind of the same as the soluble boilies, but with soluble pellets essentially. So the pellets would turn to mush over a period of time, slowly releasing aminos. And the lower the feed quality of the pellets, in my opinion, the better, because you don't want the fish to eat depth charge. You want them to release the aminos, right? So,
Say that again about adding the powder. I'd missed that bit.
oh yeah, so the amino acids in their pure state are a powder,
Yeah, of
right?
course. Yeah.
So if and this is interesting because at the website there's a trade area and potential business partners, who wish to buy the product in bulk are able to buy the powder, right? And they can mix it in with their base mix from there. Okay. So, but that's only through special contract, right? Because we're paranoid about people like, analyzing the powder to see what's in it, right? So we
You could
generally
get,
sell to the public
yeah.
in terms of a liquid solution or a paste or whatever, right? So like it does take a little bit of paperwork to allow companies to buy the powder, but we, under contract, we will sell it to them for sure. And then they can put it in their own solubles or they can put it in their own pellets or whatever it is. Yeah, and that's really the next step. The next step for the company, we're not another bait manufacturer that sells to angling public, although we do obviously sell to the public through our website. We're really interested in like supplying manufacturers because this, is a product that will increase the effectiveness of any bait. And we don't want to be making the bait. We want to be selling the ingredient that goes in the bait.
Interesting.
Yeah.
Yeah, very interesting. Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. Patrick, I mean, there's so many different things and little
Yeah.
rabbit holes that as you were
Yeah.
talking, I thought, got to go down there and as you do, or as I do, I just forget.
Yeah.
Is there anything you think I've neglected to ask you or to bring up?
Let's just recap the main points, I guess. So since last time, where we were using a dual amino basic and neutral blend with a reasonably broad window, that's now old science, and we're now using the blocker amino blend with an unlimited window, essentially, right? So we've now completely upgraded the theory and the associated Impulse 2.0. Where the research is now, the Impulse 2.0 is in the bag. That's a finished product which you can buy in various forms, and you've got some sitting in front of you, right? And that's a universal attractant because every fish has the basic neutral receptor, right? What we're on now, and this is kind of the exciting thing we're doing this spring, is we're going for species specific attractants, and that's kind of a whole new game for me, right? So we already got the catfish one pretty much in the bag. The carp one and the hydro one I mentioned are kind of a real kind of passion for me at the moment. I'm really excited by these two projects. And I'm also really excited by the mathematical modeling we've been doing with the math department here at college. And that's really starting to bear fruit now. So, and all these things have combined for me personally. And, from a scientific perspective, my main focus in the United States is this contract I have with the government where they're going to kind of use my carp attractant in their Asian carp project. So that's kind of, for a scientist to kind of have the government come and license your product is kind of a badge of honor kind of thing. So that's what I'm really excited about at the moment, right? And as a carp fisherman, from the UK originally, my passion, of course, lies with carp fishing. And because the company owns the intellectual property, it's just licensed to the government, I can use that in carp baits. So anything that comes from this government research can, if we want, be used for carp specific attractants, which is like an exciting product, which we're kind of really kind of excited about that getting to this year. So yeah, that's in a nutshell what my life is at the moment. So,
It sounds very exciting. It's
yeah.
obviously very
Yeah, the
interesting.
funny thing about it is, there are, like we mentioned earlier, there's only so many hours in a day, and I forgot one thing. So there are, only so many hours in a day, and I'm very much the science guy in the company, right? Mark is very much the engineer slash production guy, right? And a business is a three-legged stool. The one leg of the stool we're missing is a marketing salesperson. So if there's anyone out there who's kind of like saying, "Oh, I'm looking for like a job with the startup that has a future," right? We're looking for someone who can really push that aspect. And someone who can get in there and someone who understands marketing, which I have no idea about, right? Someone who understands sales, which I have no idea about. I'll give you the product, you sell it, right? It's like, as I mentioned, entrepreneurship is not my my forte. Amino acid science is. So, we're always looking for that third person. And this is actually interesting because I want to thank you, Sam, because when we had our first conversation 3 years ago, whenever it was, Mark actually listened to the podcast, and I threw a thing there. Yeah, we're looking for partners in the UK because at the time I was mailing stuff from the US, right? And Mark actually stepped up. We had a great conversation on the phone, and that was the start of a great partnership. So it was literally down to the podcast that Mark and I were able to get together. So that was awesome.
Oh,
So
amazing.
hopefully that'll pay off as well for someone who wants to be that third leg, right, of the company, right? So
Yeah, absolutely.
yeah.
Absolutely. So lastly, obviously new product line, they can find that at biosourcebaits.com.
Yeah,
Right.
that's where the products are. And the scientific work is at aminotech.com, which is our
Oh,
other website.
and there's something else actually. Sorry, here's me rounding off.
Yeah.
Something I wanted to give you a grilling over, if that's all
Oh,
right.
okay. Get to grilling.
Your what's this guarantee? I don't think it's a
Oh, yeah.
guarantee, but it is a
All right.
kind of
Yeah.
guarantee.
So this
What is
is my
this?
naive marketing idea, right? And the third person will probably say, "What are you doing, silly?"
I'm
But the
going to say it
bottom
now.
line is this, right? So when we did the spa shot study years ago now
Mm.
with Jigsaw, which was our like inferior product, right? We got like an average of a 2.1 to 1 catch rate with and without, right? And an average. So on average, they double the amount of fish if everything else was equal, right? So what we've done, we've designed something at the webpage called the Impulse Challenge, where if people want to take the challenge, we can now make a guarantee they'll catch more fish, not necessarily twice as much fish, just more fish, right? So we're
Yeah.
saying, hey, if you fish one rod with the product, one rod without, you'll catch more fish on the rod with. And we're guaranteeing that based on not just me kind of like flapping my gums here, but based on results from scientific studies, right?
But
One out of 20 times it may not work, right? But the rules of the challenge are you got to do it twice, right? So it's a one in just statistically, what if they do it right? There's a 1 in 400 chance they won't catch more fish twice in a row. And that's what we're hanging our hat on, right? We absolutely believe anglers will catch more fish. And that's going to be our buzz line at the angling show in March, right? More fish guaranteed. It's cheesy, I know, but it's
I,
something we're actually going to back, right?
I think it screams volumes about your conviction about these
Yeah,
products. I mean,
yeah. We are going large. We'll go home, right? And we are so confident based on our results that it does it what it says on the tin, right?
but in reality,
Mm.
sorry, there is far too many variables for this to be
Yeah,
accurate. You can't.
yeah. That's
I
that's
would
why
never.
when yeah
I would
yeah. So
never go and take this out and expect to
no.
double my catch rate.
No,
It
no,
just
this
wouldn't
is
be
this is
fair.
the thing, Sam. So, like, when you follow the rules of the challenge, you got to explicitly follow the rules as written to
Right.
make those variables disappear, right? So, random
Okay.
variables disappear, right? If you follow what's called a double-blind procedure, right? So you do it like a true scientific test, and we lay it out like make sure you do this, this, and this, and they can contact us if they need advice, whatever. But yeah, if they do it right, they should catch more fish. I mean, literally every time I go out, I catch more fish on the impulse rod.
Yeah.
Um, so it's all a matter of just like doing it correctly and fishing, and because people always want to go out and fish both rods with the impulse, and they say, "Oh, never caught anything on it." Well, maybe there weren't any fish in that spot
Oh,
today,
Christ. Of
right? Yeah.
course. Yeah.
Yeah. So you got to fish in the same spot when the rules are very clear on this, like 10 meters apart or so, something like that. Say if you're fishing same rig, same bait, one dose, one not dosed, exactly the same each rod, exactly the same. The only thing that's different is the bait. And if you make that happen, you'll see it. You'll definitely see something.
And your trust. So and what if they don't? What happens? Do they?
Yeah. So statistically, most anglers statistically will see a 2 to 1, right? So that's over 50%. Some will see, depends on environmental conditions, of course, right? If you're fishing next to a weed bed and not fishing next to a weed bed, but we try and make it so you're kind of like in a very, very similar spot, right? So 1 in 20 might not see it, but it's very, very rare. And that's what the Spa Schultz study tells us. And then, then the anglers talk to us and they say, oh, this worked, this didn't work. And then we say, well, just tune it a little bit, try it again. And if they don't get it 2 in a row, which is 400 to 1, guess, right? Based on 20 times 20. So then they get, then they can kind of exercise the guarantee, right? But chances are that they'll be more than satisfied with the result.
Yeah, but do they get their money back or anything? Or
Uh honestly, we've written a challenge document. I think, if I remember correctly, they get like store credit or something like that.
So you're relying on people to be honest.
Well, yeah. So that was our main that was our main concern. Will people be making stuff up? And that's why, if you read the challenge, there are kind of like language things in there that kind of address that, right? So, there is the temptation for a free lunch, but we're onto them, right? We know we know if they're trying to have a free lunch. So yeah.
Well, for anyone listening, I mean, go ahead, do that challenge, but obviously you got
Yeah.
to you don't want
Yeah,
to
it's
cheat
interesting.
yourself.
Yeah, at the show where, as I mentioned before, it's mostly get to know people and just get the brand out there, and
Yeah,
anglers are welcome for a chat. And we're literally giving away free samples, so you don't even have to buy it, right?
yeah. Well, there we go.
Yeah.
Amazing.
So test tubes of 30 milliliter
Yeah.
test tubes, which will go on a kilo of bait. Yeah.
Yeah. Superb, Patrick. I have a few more questions for you, which I'm going to save because I know you said you'd very kindly come on and chat to the Bait Club members,
Oh yeah.
which is very, very kind of you. So a few more juicy things and in and outs, and I know you promised to give away all your secrets in there. I'm joking. So I'll save it for that. But yeah, I really I enjoyed this chat. There's a lot to go over. I think, in all honesty, we're going to listen to this back and think, oh, damn, I should have asked this or I should have explored that.
Yeah. Well, if
You,
you want to now, Sam, your bait club, is that like a podcast also, or is that kind of more of a private thing?
no, it's a private club.
Oh, okay.
Yeah,
All right.
private club.
Yeah. So yeah, if we want to come on again and have a catch up, we can do that.
It'd be great. I mean, yeah, maybe we'll do that.
Yeah, if like
Um,
if when we get a lot of comments, or people are like, well, you missed this, you should have said this,
yeah,
that, and the other. If sure. I mean, I'm available. I'm always willing. This is kind of fun because people always contact me. Well, not always. I get like maybe 3 or 4 emails a month through the website, and people ask me very specific questions about amino acids, and I
yeah,
tell them the answers, right? So and I'll put that out there. Anybody who has a legitimate question and is really interested in the topic and is really stumped at the moment and wants to know what's going on, if you've read my articles and it's still not clear, or you have a question about the articles, yeah, feel free, right? The website has my email address. You can send me an email and I always respond. I actually love talking to anglers because I learn just as much from them in terms of the application of impulse as they learn from me in terms of the theory of how it works. So I'm always looking to, at the end of the day, working with anglers, it helps me kind of make a better product essentially. Because if I learn how they use it and how they optimize it, that's good information for me. So, I'm always love chatting with them, particularly anglers who fish for weird things. I got a guy on the West Coast fishes for sturgeon, right? I'm like, wow, it works for sturgeon. That's great, right? So
well, you've done it now. You're going to get inundated with people, I'm sure.
yeah, I don't mind. All right. So it's like one of those things, right? It may take a while to reply, but I will reply, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
So hold tight. If you send me an email, I will reply. Or better, just come and talk to me at the show, right? If you make it out to Farnborough in the first week of March, second and third, I think it is the big one, the show. Yeah, we'll be there hanging out with a pot of coffee and a table, and just sit there and have a chat, right? That's all we're doing, right? We're not, no hard sell, just chatting.
Awesome.
Yeah.
Patrick, biosourcebaits.com. Thanks ever so much, my man.
Appreciate it, Sam. Awesome.
Cheers, man.
All right, see ya.